Stacy Salisbury, come on down. You're our grand prize winner today as our board liaison. Who's doing double duty for welcome team? So anybody who would like to help with that, please sign up.
Good morning. My name is Stacy Salisbury, and I'm a member of the Board of Trustees. I'm also a member of the Spiritual Practice Team. Welcome to our service. Unitarian Universalism encourages an open-ended search for meaning in life and a commitment to asking our values to shape our actions. We are a pluralistic religion that draws wisdom from many sources. We welcome all people into our beloved community of whatever age, race, class, ethnicity, ability, sexual orientation, gender identity, or religious background. We especially welcome those of you who may be worshiping with us for the first time. Due to ongoing COVID-19 mitigation strategies, we're not having our normal coffee hour after service, but you can come on over for a fantastic conversation about our difficult conversations workshop that we recently had. You don't have to have gone to that workshop to understand it, but we're just going to talk about how to talk with each other better. And that'll happen right after the service, so please think about staying. And you can check our calendar and our newsletter for announcements of program and events. Guests are welcome to participate in any activities in our community. And if you'd like more information about the congregation, or if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask any board member or Reverend Jay. Thank you.
Thank you, Stacy, and thank you for doing double duty this morning. Much appreciated. Just very quickly, announcements of some events that are happening this week. This PM, also at 3 p.m., there is an ethics class. I think it will be on humility is the ethic we'll be talking about today. That's online. Wednesday night, there'll be a class, a continuing class on Article 2, which is this week. Topic will be the purpose of the Unitarian Universalist Association. As well, Wednesday night, there's an environmental justice meeting on Zoom. And Wednesday night's a big night here, in person, choir and chime. So if you've ever had a desire, and you don't have to be on that, if you want to learn it, even if you've never played the chimes before, you can be on our chimes choir.
Actually, this week we won't be rehearsing.
Okay.
Next Wednesday, yeah.
Okay, next Wednesday. Well, okay. So, and one last thing, just a reminder, you should have received a letter this week or last about our current year pledge drive as we prepare to start creating our budget for next year that you will vote on in our May annual meeting. So if you could return those, or if you have questions about those, to please ask either me, someone in the finance committee, or stewardship team, and we can direct you to those people if you don't have their contact. All right, our opening reading today is from Leslie Takahashi Morris, called Marginal Wisdom. They teach us to read in black and white. Truth is this, the rest false. You are whole or broken. Who you love is acceptable or not. Life tells its truth in many hues, but we are taught to think in either or, to believe in the teachings of Jesus or Buddha, right? To believe in human potential or a power beyond a single will. I am broken or I am powerful. Life embraces multiple truths, speaks of both and of and. We are taught to see in absolutes, good versus evil, male versus female, old versus young, gay versus straight. Let us see the fractions, the spectrum, the margins. Let us open our hearts to the complexity of our worlds. Let us make our lives sanctuaries to nurture our many identities. Each of us are not just one thing. The day is coming when all will know that the rainbow world is more gorgeous than monochrome. That a river of identities can ebb and flow over the static, stubborn rocks in its course. That the margins are what hold the center. So let us light our chalice now. Let it be a symbol for us to light that way across those stubborn rocks in the course. Please join me in the reading of our chalice lighting words. In the light of truth and the warmth of love, we gather to seek, to sustain, and to inspire.
Hi, I'm Diane Hammerand, a member of this congregation. We acknowledge the traditional owners of country on which our congregation's grounds are located, the Kickapoo, Peoria, Sauk, and Meskwaki, Miamiaki, and Oshikoshakawan, and recognize their continuing connection to land, waters, and culture. We pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging.
Please rise in body and or spirit for our opening hymn, I Wish I Knew How. I wish I knew how to be free. I wish I could break all these chains holding me. I wish I could say all the things I could say. Say 'em loud, say 'em clear, for the whole world to hear. Say 'em loud, say 'em clear, for the whole world to hear. I wish I could share all the love in my heart. Remove all the bars that still keep us apart. I wish you could know what it means to be me. Then you'd see and agree everyone should be free. Then you'd see and agree everyone should be free. I wish I could give all I'm longing to give. I wish I could live like I'm longing to live. I wish I could do all the things I can do. Though I'm way overdue, I'd be starting anew. Though I'm way overdue, I'd be starting anew. I wish I could be like a bird in the sky. How sweet it would be if I found I could fly. I'd soar to the sun and look down at the sea. Then I'd sing 'cause I know how it feels to be free. Then I'd sing 'cause I know how it feels to be free.
Woo! Critical race theory, or CRT as it's been known, has been in the news recently. It's being used as a cudgel in the Virginia's, I think it was governor's race, as to whether it should be taught in schools. And many states have subsequently enacted laws restricting its use. Some states with very specific wording, and others like Iowa, which I'll talk about later, with much more vague wording, whose meaning is meant to discourage teaching it. Get it? Go ahead, answer. It's okay. I thought it important to really understand what is critical race theory, right? To understand what it is. I'm really curious. Why is it that people are so frightened of what is being called critical race theory? So, CRT is a theory that started in the 1970s and has accelerated more recently as it becomes clear that the implementation of the Civil Rights Act, which was dramatic progress in its day from where we were, did not bring about the changes to improve outcomes for many minorities in this country. It's important to understand that critical race theory is a really broad academic study. So, to deny teaching it is like saying we are not going to study economics at all because I do not like the University of Chicago's economic policy paper on deregulation, which I don't like that one, by the way. But, Milton Friedman, that whole thing, I don't agree with that. But that doesn't mean we're not going to study economics, right? So I could talk every week for the remainder of the year on the complexities of this academic study. But I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to give you a brief overview today. One of the various theories within the critical race theory is material determinism versus idealism. So according to Richard Delgado, idealists, and I quote, holds that racism and discrimination are matters of thinking, mental categorization, attitude, and discourse. And if race is a social construction, they propose we as a society can change that construction through, and I quote again, image, words, attitudes, unconscious feelings, scripts, and social teachings. Now, the material determinists, although recognizing the importance the idealists' ideas, look at racism as a way that the society allocates privilege and power and determines who gets the material benefits of society, thus why it's called material determinism. It focuses on anti-Black prejudice as a rationale for slavery and how that prejudice has been maintained in the structures in our laws. It is true, as critics argue, right, that slavery has existed for almost as long as there has been humankind. But slavery based on race was really a uniquely Western Europe and American experience. In order to justify slavery in a country whose founding documents said that all men were created equal, our founders needed to somehow come up with a rationale, right, that slaves were not fully human. The seed for this idea was planted in many ways, but in one large step that it moved forward was after the Bacon Rebellion in 1676, 100 years before our revolution. Right, European and African indentured servants and African slaves rose up against the Virginia colony leadership. And soon after then, of course, the state of Virginia violently put down this rebellion. And soon after, Virginia and then other states following them passed slave codes that clearly differentiated the status of Europeans and Africans, giving workers with European heritage independence and status over Africans. And those of African heritage were declared hereditary slaves, meaning their children would always be slaves ongoing. So this is what critical race theorists would call interest conversion theory. How our white culture allows more freedom to certain groups when circumstances require. It is argued even that desegregation and the elimination of Jim Crow laws were due to the needs of the white power structure. After the Korean War, the Justice Department finally interceded on the side of the NAACP in a major school desegregation case that became Brown versus Brown. For years, the NAACP had been filing these suits. But finally, I think it was 54, 55, the Justice Department weighed in support of desegregation. But what later historians have found out is that the Justice Department's response was due to the United States' interest in improving its image in the eyes of the Third World as the Cold War within Russia accelerated, and as well a way to quell labor unrest of African Americans returning yet again from war, having served our country, finding more freedom overseas than they found in their own country. And they knew these two events were pressuring our societal structure, and so they allowed and advocated for more rights. Now, if interest convergence is right, and you believe that, then I do actually see this in some ways as a hopeful sign. Right? As the world becomes more interdependent, people with multicultural skills will become more valuable in our white society. Right? And I said that very specifically because that is the way that our society works. Usually the word white is silent. So depending on which school of thought you follow, right, materialists would say you have to change the physical circumstances of minorities' lives before you can change, before racism will abate. Right, that you have to take care of the physical, and then the mental will follow. This group would support unions, right, for higher pay, immigration quotas, ending the school to prison pipeline, ending mass incarceration, ending outsourcing of jobs. And if one is in the idealist camp, issues of hate speech, stereotyping, peace circles, increasing representation of minorities in public spaces and the media and so forth to help change people's perceptions about minorities, which they believe will then lead to more equitable outcomes. And of course, that is a false binary. It's not either or, it is both and. And another merging issue is the question of essentialism versus anti-essentialism. Essentialism is the focus on the question of whether there is a common factor that impacts all oppressed people. And can there be a united front, right, that combines all oppressed people? And of course, the problem with this is that some groups or people of certain identities are often ignored. Thinking of African American women during the civil rights movement in the 1960s, often, although they were very active in it, they were never in the front, and their issues were never in the front. And so I think that is something to recognize. Yeah, and we're seeing more study of intersectionality of identities, how there are different challenges based on multiple identities, whether that be race, sexual orientation, gender identity, religious background, and some combination thereof. You have different challenges you face as a black woman versus as a black man, or as a gay black man would be different than a straight black man. Faces different challenges in the world. And so often we see the power structures divide and conquer, right? Such as with the response to Bacon's rebellion, right? They saw if all the white and all the black and indigenous people gathered against them, they might be in trouble. And so they pitted the poor white workers against the poor African workers and slaves. And we see this even in our current society all the time with policies or laws that come down that are created, that create divisions, sometimes between African Americans and the Jewish community, sometimes between the Latinx and the LGBTQ communities. And the truth is, we are more powerful together, working together for collective liberation. Another hot button issue is nationalism versus assimilation. Some feel that minorities should embrace their culture and origins, while others feel that they are doing more good breaking barriers in the white-dominated world. And this seems to break down along the lines of the materialists and the idealists. The materialists, nationalists believe in actually giving up the struggle for integration and to build their own communities to be as strong as possible, utilizing and living within their own culture. And it's interesting to think about this is the same distinction that Malcolm X and Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had in the 1960s. White people just have the expectation that other cultures should assimilate into European culture, not the other way around. Which brings us to the fourth concept that often critical race theorists focus on, which is the concept of white studies. Now, it's true, most white people, right, do not think of themselves in racial terms, what it means to be white, right? We never hear anybody say my white friend Joe or my white wife Jan, right? You never hear that. I think this whiteness as normal is like truly epitomized in an interview I saw on, I think it was Meet the Press, with Chuck Todd and Nicole Hannah-Jones, who about the 1619 Project. And Chuck Todd asked Jones, and I'm quoting here, parents are saying, hey, don't make my kids feel guilty. And a parent of color is going, what are you talking about? I need to teach reality. Now, I want to see if you caught that, right? Joan's response to him, I just want you to think a little bit about your framing. You said parents, right? As in, parents are saying, don't make my kids feel guilty, right? And then you said parents of color. So if you know, the white is silent, right? It's like as if we just accept that the white is the norm. You don't have to differentiate it or mention it, right? It's so embedded in our culture that white is the norm, that white people do not have to identify what they see is white. They just assume that is what should be. Now, another recent example of this was when Senator Mitch McConnell was asked how he would respond to voters in minority communities who are concerned that voting restrictions being enacted will keep them from the ballot box. And his response was, and I quote, "The concern is misplaced because if you look at the statistics, African American voters are voting in just as high a percentage as Americans." That is what he said. It's on recording. Again, this reveals this unconscious aspect of his mind that African Americans are somehow different from Americans, right? That American is white is assumed by him. Of course, he said it was a misstatement, but personally, I think that was an unconscious slip on his part. And it really showed who he was. This was literally in the founding of our country, right? Citizenship was only granted to white landowning men. Over time, groups of different racial groups, and then women, but other racial groups were to be defined by law as white to become citizens, right? There were people from India, from Japan, who tried to claim by law that they were white because you got benefits in this country if you were white. And so after setting one set of standards and somebody else met that standards, the law then said, well, common sense tells you who's white. So it took a long time until that law was changed in this country. Probably I think it was the 1950s sometime. This is still in the ethos of our country. Forced cultural assimilation by law to become a citizen, right? Uh, and so, yeah, I want us all to think about, right? What does this have to do with the bills that are passing in many states banning critical race theory? Well, you'll have to wait till my second reflection to find out about that one. But one thing you will not have to wait for any longer is our offering. Each month we share our offering 50% with our a group chosen by our social justice teams. This month, our collection will be going to Transitions Mental Health, which has worked to create a mental health court in Scott County, diverting individuals from prison. Please be as generous as you can. As well, if you like, we invite you to come up to light a candle, to mark a joy or sorrow in your life. And for those who are online, we invite you, if you'd like, to write a joy or sorrow online, which will be read after the musical interlude. Let this sacred time begin. Each week we come together and we share our joys and sorrows, some by lighting a candle, some by writing a book, some in the silent sanctuaries of our heart. I don't see any online. There's one in the book from Anne, Diane, and Hannah Harrington. This week we remember the life of Betty Gorshi, who died 18 years ago this Tuesday. She was instrumental in preserving and writing our church's history while always fighting for progressive change. Though she is gone, her passionate and feisty spirit live on through Anne, Diane, and Hannah. Yes. I'd also like to just recognize yesterday was Remembrance Day for Japanese internment in 1942. During World War II, President Roosevelt signed the Executive Order 9066, which gave the U.S. Army the authority to remove civilians of Japanese descent. Over 120,000 were incarcerated, who were living on the West Coast. Many had to abandon their jobs, their homes, their lives, sent to one of 10 camps scattered in desolate, remote regions of the country. I know one of our friends, as a child, one of the friends of the congregation, as a child, actually lived in one of those camps. And it's a reminder, and this was not that long ago, of our inhumanity towards our residents of this country. Let us take a moment of silence to consider all the joys and sorrows, our own and those of others that we care about and in the larger community. I bring us out of the silence with a poem called A Time by Fred Yamashita. A time to be or not to be, to reiterate my show of loyalty. My love of life and land is like that of any other man. Then why should we be denied? We can't trust the slanty-eyed. This can't be real, this tale of fiction. Still, I salute the contradiction. That wave so bold, red, white, and blue, it stands for freedom and justice. For who? The time to see or not to see what happened to my family, to my people so strong, so proud, the tears they shed aren't heard aloud. But anger and confusion seeps through my soul. And what we want America to know is that we will endure despite and within the laws you have forged to fence us in. We will fight for you. Unlock these yellow hands, and with our blood, prove to be true Americans.
I invite the UU singers up. We will be performing a song called Friendship, which on the surface is jolly, light, carefree, not like the topic of today's service. However, deep down, simply put, I think it's a message of being for others. And it lists a bunch of funny circumstances, but being there in person, in action, and speaking for that. And UU Singers is performing this Sunday. Chalice Chimes is next Sunday. As Reverend Jay mentioned, we meet Wednesday nights and are always welcoming new people.
Yeah, I do want to point out, thank you, John, for mentioning that. Like, this is heavy stuff. This is important, difficult stuff, and it does require friendship so that we can have these difficult conversations, both within and out of the congregation. And so, yes, we have to go into it with a full spirit and friendliness. And and I think that's important to think about. Why is this? This is, I think, always an important thing to bring it back to. Why is this important to us as Unitarian Universalists, right? Of course, one of our principles of Unitarian Universalism is the free and responsible search for truth and meaning and justice, equity, and compassion for human relations. So anything that impedes, not just for us, but for our children, right, the search for truth, right? We have to speak up against anything that impedes that. The goal of education is not just to educate individuals, but to teach individuals how to think. Right? Critical thinking, right? That's what it's called, right? Critical race theory. Critical thinking is an important part of the educational process. And this was part of my upbringing as part in the Jewish religion, as we studied the texts of the rabbis arguing sometimes over the most minute point in the Jewish scriptures. It was also part of my public school education in New York City, starting as early as middle school, because, grade school, we just sort of did things by rote and played ball and. So, but most memorable for me in childhood of some of these learnings were books such as Black Boy by Richard Wright, The Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison, and the autobiography of Malcolm X, among many others. All three of these books are now on multiple banned book lists. I was pretty shocked to find that out. And some could say maybe they did damage me. I don't know. You can judge that for yourself. But I felt, honestly, these books showed me a window into a world that I was pretty much unaware of, even living in a very multiracial cosmopolitan city. My awareness of myself and the world would be less without them. So why all this fuss now about critical race theory? And the criticism of CRT seemed to explode after the publication of the 1619 Project by Nicole Hannah-Jones, who won the Pulitzer Prize for those writings, by the way. And what seemed to galvanize her critics was her supposition that the founding of this country should be traced back to the date 1619, the date that the first slave from Africa arrived in Jamestown in the United States, and not 1776 when we had our revolution. Now, you can make legitimate arguments for and against this thesis. Still, it is hard to argue against the American enslavement of Africans was an integral part of the founding and the wealth of this country. And just look at our Constitution, right? On our founding, slavery was actually written into and codified within the Constitution when it was first written. One of our largest complaints in the Declaration of Independence against the King of England was that England was fomenting uprisings of slaves in America. So slavery was part of, at least, the core reason of our independence as well. Slavery lasted until we fought a civil war about it, and hundreds upon hundreds of thousands died. I personally think that Jones is maybe overly pessimistic about the future of race relations in our country, but I recognize that it's easier for me to say as a white man. In my lifetime, I have seen tremendous progress, and I have seen ongoing heartbreak. It is not a linear line to freedom. We cannot let up, though. We are at, I really believe we are at a tipping point. As Unitarian minister Theodore Parker said, the arc of the universe bends towards justice. And I always like to add, we need to bend it to justice. It doesn't just happen on its own. Right? It's when people bring pressure for change, and particularly people who are in the norm, who are in the dominant culture, when they bring pressure for change, often that is when change happens. And so Iowa, of course, has joined the chorus of states I spoke earlier on its, on silencing the teaching of critical race theory, which, of course, I mean, there is an irony in that, right? That they are trying to silence a theory via law that says systemic racism is created by laws. And so they are sort of affirming the argument of critical race theory. If they had a real argument against CRT, they should discuss it in the realm of academics and education. And I actually pulled out the Iowa law. This is why I love the internet. Before the internet, you'd have to go down to the courthouse, ask for copies, boom. In 30 seconds, I had the whole law right in front of me. I know younger people, it just, you grew up with it, but it still amazes me. So I want to just share with you a few bits of the law. It requires that government agencies, including schools, do not teach, advocate, act upon, or promote divisive concepts. That's what the law says. And then it defines what divisive concepts are. One, and there are many, I'm just going to go over 4 of them. One, that one race or sex is inherently superior to another race or sex. Okay, sounds good. Another divisive concept is that the United States of America and the state of Iowa are fundamentally or systemic racist or sexist. So, even after being emancipated, this country allowed Jim Crow laws, which blatantly discriminated against African Americans. And then more recently, we have mass incarceration that arrests African Americans at much higher rates than whites, with sentencing for crimes at higher rates for African Americans than whites. From the school to prison pipeline, which suspends and refers for detention African American youth at a much higher rate than white youth for the same offenses. We are not in a post-racial world. Race still matters in so many areas, including jobs, education, housing, access to medical care. Race discrimination has now accelerated with voter restrictions, right, that disproportionately disenfranchise African Americans. It is hard for me to argue we are not a racist country in our laws and policies. That doesn't mean that many African Americans don't overcome that. They do. It's more difficult. I mean, just in the paper this last week, I read about an environmental cleanup fund that they are specifically eliminating race as a criteria for areas of cleanup. Even though often dangerous environmental hazards are specifically put in African American communities because often they have the least political power. But we won't give money to them to clean those up. The third divisive thing that they list is that an individual's moral character is necessarily determined by an individual's race or sex. And yet, we know, and I can tell you because I was on the Davenport Commission on Racial Profiling. Profiling studies show, and school suspensions clearly show, that that is exactly what police and educators do with African Americans. They stop their cars because they're a black person driving a car. And the only reason they do that is because why? Because some black person had committed a crime, and just because they're black, right? So, you know, is it okay for white people to do that to black people, but not for black people to do that to white people, right? So that would be great, but it can't be one-sided. And number four, the divisive issue, which I admit I was surprised that this line was in the law. It claimed a divisive concept is one in which, and I quote, any individual should feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, or any other form of psychological distress on account of that individual's race or sex, end quote. You know, any new learning, I'm sure maybe there's somebody here who might feel a little discomfort right now. There's nothing wrong, right, with feeling discomfort. And you don't have to agree, right? Like I always say that to people. This is something for you to think about, right? And yes, maybe it will cause a little discomfort, but that's not bad. Our Unitarian Universalist faith asks us to challenge the status quo. We have from day one, as we did theologically challenging the normative view of Christianity and religion in general. We believe that revelation is ongoing, right? Searching for truth does not have to cause anguish and distress. It should cause us to be curious, right? It should cause us to be in awe that there is so much more that we need to know to understand the universe. And to understand that history is based on the perspective of who is telling the story. So I invite us to, and this is the same true for a congregation, right? I invite us to listen to each other's stories, right? And not just ours, but also people outside the congregation. Our country will never be whole until we face the truth about our past. And yes, you can nitpick here or there about something in the 1619 Project, but it takes willful refusal to examine the overarching facts about the long history of racism in our country. And although this provision about discomfort was thought to prevent harm to white students, that also can work both ways. I imagine African Americans will feel discomfort about what is being taught about slavery in their history classes. And then what happens and what will be the response? We cannot allow propaganda and outright lies taint our educational system. The country acts as if there has been some ongoing pedagogy that indoctrinates children. But as the writer Cliff Smith of The Atlantic wrote, telling the truth about slavery is not indoctrination. In fact, if anything, we have already been failing our students. In a 2018 study on education from the Southern Poverty Law Center, only 8% of high school students could identify that slavery was the central cause of the Civil War. Over half did not know that at the time of American Revolution, slavery was legal in all 13 colonies. And although a large percentage of teachers support teaching about slavery, over 60% of them do not feel they have adequate textbooks to do it. You know, the law says we should not make white people feel guilty for something that happened before even our ancestors arrived on these shores. And I'm going to say I think that is a misperception. I can tell you I don't feel guilty, right? Of course, my family struggled. My ancestors before me struggled and worked hard to put me in a position to achieve things. But BIPOC, and by that stands for Black, Indigenous, people of color, face those same challenges as well, but they have additional challenges due to their race over and above that. Racial profiling, mass incarceration, job discrimination, environmental discrimination, among many. No, I don't feel guilty. But what I feel, and what I think we all should feel is compassion and responsibility, right? To right past and current wrongs of our country. And until we do so, until we recognize the challenges of our siblings of color, until we take action to right the wrongs of this country's founders, then we are culpable. As Archbishop Desmond Tutu of South Africa said, if you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. Now, we need to take time to educate ourselves and our children, but it is time to make a change in our country, in our society. It is time to recognize the historical and current harm that has and is being done, and to make amends for those harms. And by doing so, we will be redeemed. May it be so. And I invite you to rise in body and or spirit for our closing hymn, 121, We'll Build a Land.
We'll build a land where we bind up the broken. We'll build a land where the captives go free, where the oil of gladness dissolves all mourning. Oh, we'll build a promised land that can be. Come, build a land where all of the people, anointed by God, may then create peace, where justice shall roll down like waters, and peace like an ever-flowing stream. We'll build a land where we bring the good tidings to all the afflicted and all those who mourn, and we'll give them garlands instead of ashes. Oh, we'll build a land where peace is born. Come, build a land where all of the people, anointed by God, may then create peace, where justice shall roll down like waters, and peace like an ever-flowing stream. We'll build a land, building up ancient cities, raising up devastations from old, restoring ruins of generations. Oh, build a land of people so bold. Come, build a land where all of the people, anointed by God, may then create peace, where justice shall roll down like waters, and peace like an ever-flowing stream. Come, build a land where the mantles of praises resound from spirits once faint and once weak, where like oaks of righteousness stand her people. Oh, come build the land, my people we seek. Come build a land where all of the people, anointed by God, may then create peace, where just shall roll down like waters, and peace like an ever-flowing stream.
Our closing words are also from Leslie Takahashi Morris. Reverend Leslie Takahashi Morris, called On the Brink. All that we have ever loved and all that we have ever been stands with us on the brink of all that we aspire to create. A deeper peace, a larger love, a more embracing hope, a greater generosity of spirit, a deeper joy in this life that we share. Please join me in extinguishing the chalice, the words of which will be up on the screen. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.